Welcome back. Well, as I'm sure you know, we live in a society where so many people simply don't have enough food, where many fathers, many mothers don't have supper at night, so they can give the food they do have to their children. And yet, it's understood that around 45% of our total food supply is being wasted, mainly because of wastage in the way the food is produced and transported. And most farmers aren't even able to measure how much they're actually losing. This is before you look at the amount of food which may be wasted by your average middle-class bachelor. Pubs Pillay is an environmental change practitioner at the Worldwide Fund for Nature. Pubs, good afternoon to you, and thanks for your time. 45% of our food being wasted, that's a huge figure. Why is it so high?
Absolutely, and thank you, Stephen. Yeah, I mean, that's what we as WWF South Africa have measured, along with the CSIR. And if you look at it, it's across the entire supply chain. So from when it's produced, that means harvested, farmed, etc., all the way till end of consumer. And that's pretty much half of all the food we produce in South Africa. If we didn't waste the 45, we'd probably be able to feed every single South African. But our food system is very broken. And we waste for so many reasons. We waste for oversupply. We waste because there's cosmetic reasons. We want pears and bananas to be the perfect shape, to be the perfect length. We waste because we actually just produce far too much that we can sell. We waste because we produce one specific crop, and then all of a sudden there's no market for that. So there's all the surplus. And instead of actually redirecting it, it gets dumped or it gets left on the farms to rot.
What in particular is happening on the farms? I mean, I'd imagine for them, wasting food is wasting money. This is stuff they put resources into producing. I mean, to just leave it lying in the field isn't what they want to do.
Absolutely. And you know, most farmers do look at it, but you must remember that farming is a business, and it's not feasible or it's not viable financially for them to divert that waste. And very often, farmers just don't have the capital to either transport it or secondary produce. And what I mean secondary produce is get it to somebody who can make it into pillow packs, cut it up or juice it or dry it. They just don't have that kind of funding. So very often what they tend to do is it just goes to waste. About 40% of all farmers don't quantify their waste. So they don't even know how much they're actually wasting on their farm. So they have no systems in place where they calculate how much have they produced, great, but how much of that production is actually lost.
Is some food going lost in sort of supermarkets because it gets past an expiry date? I understand why an expiry date's there, but everyone plays safety first. So, you know, food has got an expiry date maybe 2 days before it would actually expire, things like that. Is that happening too in the system?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've quantified what's happening at farm level, but there's definitely as much waste, probably around the 30% much in the retail component. Yes, for various reasons, it's reached its sell by, use by date, and a lot of consumers don't understand those dates either. You know, sell by is not for consumers. Sell by is for the actual retailer. Use by is for consumers, and people need to understand that that is a recommendation. We've forgotten how to use our senses. So, you know, if something has reached its use-by date, it doesn't mean that at midnight on that day you need to toss it. You need to, you know, use a little common sense, smell it, taste it if you have to, look at it, feel it, and then decide whether, you know, you can use it or not. Very often, most food products have at least another week or a couple of days before that use-by date. And then, you know, there is that where it just sits there. Nobody purchases it because they either don't understand the use-by dates or it just hasn't shifted off the market. And that also can get wasted. What has happened in the retail space in the last couple of years, which has been fantastic, is there's been projects and put in place to divert that to places like SA Harvest, Food Forward, community charities that actually then take that food and then sort out what is usable. And I hate to call food wasted. Food is because it has such a bad connotation. For me, it's rescued, or it's, you know, it's changing the purpose of a specific piece of food that you're having. So I often call it rescued food. And then places like Food Forward South Africa, which is a great organization, then get all of this surplus food, they then repackage it, they look at what they can use, and then they divert it to a whole bunch of charities, schools, you know, basically organizations that can feed millions and millions of people.
Perhaps producing food is a business, and I don't have a problem with that because it's quite a resilient business, and because you have different suppliers, it means that even during a hard lockdown, for example, that business works and gets food into people, and it does it relatively cheaply. We can argue about it, but it is a business. Is there a possible economic reason, a business reason, why some of this food is wasted and why it is not in the financial interests of some of the players to stop wasting food?
Absolutely. So there is a business reason. I mean, it's just because our farmers are so hamstrung. They don't have access to as much capital as we'd like to think. And it's just not financially viable for them to be able to pay to have this food removed or to be processed. Some farmers do, and that's usually your very much larger commercial farmers that have the capital available to them. But lots of the farmers don't. The other thing as well is, there's oversupply. If they just produce too much, if there's a big demand for cabbages, and a lot of farmers plant cabbage, and all of a sudden the demand drops, the cabbages that are left are pretty much what is wasted. So yes, you're right. You would think that economically it's bad for the farmer to be wasting. But actually when you do your sums, you find that actually if he doesn't have the capital to divert that excess or oversupply of food, it's just cheaper for him to waste it, or her.
Look, I mean, I agree we shouldn't waste food, but when it comes to cabbage, I'm prepared to make an exception, perhaps. Do you think, I mean, it would require a real effort, but we could really change millions of lives if we stopped wasting this food, couldn't we?
Absolutely. And, Stephen, it starts with changing farmer perceptions and behaviors. And what we found in our study that we did with the farmers, which was so encouraging, was that 100% of them said we're mobilizers, understanding what we call climate smart technology, like moving away from spray irrigation, where you use so much water and the wind just carries the water everywhere, to drip irrigation, where you actually, it drips right down onto the plant and you don't get all of this loss to spray. Understanding, moving away from monoculture, looking at smart cultivation, looking at multiple commodities that you can farm, rather smaller hectares than big, massive commercialized farms, and then understanding proper supply chains, putting in place proper infrastructure, cold chain storage, putting in easy networks. One of the farmers said during lockdown, I'll never forget this little interview. He's a pomegranate farmer, and he said during lockdown, because the ports closed, he had tons and tons and tons of pomegranates. But he didn't know where to send them to because he couldn't export them overseas because our ports were closed. So eventually, he said he called Gift of the Givers and they were oversupplied and he just couldn't get rid of it. So he just called the community and he said, please come and take as much as you can. But, living in a community, they took as much and there were still tons that then went to waste. So putting in infrastructures and networks, smart technologies, figuring out for these farmers, how can they just use an app to say, look, guys, we have so many oranges, we have so many pomegranates. Let's not waste it. How do we divert it? And then find a way to make it a financially sound model for both the farmer and the recipient, so that we can divert away from food waste.
There's so much to it, isn't there? Parbs, thanks very much indeed.